Just a quick context thing before we start this talk. I'm aware that 90% of the people in the room will be involved in the software development team in some way. Some of this might not apply to you. You might already be in a pretty progressive team. If so, great. I'm just trying to start a discussion, and what you'll see is that there's a bit of a spectrum. And if you're anywhere on that spectrum, great. You can kind of identify where you are from there. And this is basically a worst case scenario moving forward. Also, I'm not about to offer a miracle cure of how you can walk in tomorrow and completely revamp your tech stack to do everything that you've ever wanted to do. It just doesn't quite work like that. If I can offer maybe a small suggestion or two, then that's kind of all I'm really here to offer. And if anyone takes one thing away from this, then I'll be pretty happy. So quickly, just who I am. So like James said, I'm currently the .NET specialist at Reed Technology. I'm also doing a master's in computer science, but don't ask me to do any dev because I'm just not that good. So basically I work with .NET teams around the Northwest, but mainly in Greater Manchester. I also run Behind the Buzzword, which is in .NET Meetup here in Manchester, but we are now rolling out in London and a few other cities as well. And me and Steve, who's over there, launched Tech on the Tyne in Newcastle a few months ago. And there's some social media stuff there if you want to catch me. I can't say I post that much interesting content. But yeah, quick route on how I got into this. I started at Reed. I attended my first meetup at .NET North, kind of stumbled into it. Began developing sort of my own methodology and started my own meetup. And now I'm here. Totally unqualified to do a TED Talk, but we'll crack on anyway. So yeah, quick overview of developers. This is how the world of development looks from an outsider's perspective. So some quick stats. There's about 338,000 devs in the UK at the moment. The average dev salary in Manchester is about 45 grand. Not a bad salary for an average job in terms of compared to the rest of the world. And 1 in 5 developers are now self-taught. That's going up in terms of percentage of developers who are self-taught, which is awesome. But what you're seeing is now that people aren't coming from a traditional route where they maybe address certain things. I've got the sources on where I've pulled all of these stats from, but around 3/4 of developers say that the main thing they love about their role is learning and developing and learning something new all the time. But obviously we can't always learn something new. But what I'd say is when you come up against that resistance, it can be quite sapping of motivation. It can be quite hard. You feel like you're burning yourself out. So this was a tweet posted by an account called Destroy Today, who posted his GitHub and demonstrated burnout and how it can affect you. So I've burned out before myself a long time ago, and I've burned out more recently, and you can see how your productivity is affected. But if you look at things like that, you can see how you're burning out. And this is why I think it's so important to keep yourself motivated and keep learning along the right lines. And that's sort of where the idea for this talk kind of came from. So first of all, the consequences of unhappiness are the main thing that we're looking at. Not every issue about a developer being unhappy in a job can be solved by something changing in the workplace. Incredibly, 2/3 of developers on average say that they're unhappy in their role for whatever reason at the moment. But over half of the people who are unhappy in their role for whatever reason say that they are unhappy due to consequences that are external to their own being. I will, when I put the slides up, add the source for that in there because I've just realized I've deleted that when I've been going through the talk earlier today, but I'll put the stats in there. But the reasons that people are unhappy are quite often split into 2 streams. So process, which is basically productivity, delays, so not having things done, processes not being followed, there's a broken flow, or maybe things just aren't being run properly. That could be within the technical side of things, or it could be management. It could be anything that goes on in the workplace. Or artifact, the artifact is the code. If you go into a poor code base, you're not going to have fun trying to read someone else's code from years ago where they started customizing everything and didn't leave any notes or anything like that. And they are the 2 main causes of why developers are kind of unhappy in their roles that we have found from, that I have found from my research anyway. And I will put the source to those stats up there because it wasn't my research. But yeah. The idea of this is what can we do to help shape our teams in the workplace? I'm going to start with a lot of smaller stuff, and the idea is that kind of taking it from there, we can move forward. So like I said, Rome wasn't built in a day, but even the littlest changes can have the biggest impact on happiness. For example, if you start adding So someone who hadn't gone to the gym for a long time until recently, you start adding an hour a day of going to the gym, you can see the biggest change having a lot of impact in terms of happiness, and it applies to the workplace the same way it applies to your personal life, everything else. The littlest changes can really help, and that's where we're kind of starting, and if that can snowball into something bigger, then great. So yeah, when I said everyone was on a spectrum before, this is kind of the 4 points I kind of look at on a spectrum. If you're in a company that doesn't believe in having clean code and believes in just having everything messy, and we'll work it out later, as long as it works and we patch it together, you're probably at the very far end of that spectrum. Whereas open communication at the far end, where everything's complete transparent, is kind of at the opposite end, and everything else kind of fits in between. So obviously there's the idea of clean code is just when you're doing your development, would you want another developer to go in and change your code afterwards? Could they read it? And would they want to choke you if they couldn't read it? That's kind of the attitude that I'm talking about with clean code. I'm not talking any technical specifics or any frameworks or anything like that. Paired programming, working together. I don't know who works in a paired programming environment at the moment. That's not necessarily talking about paired programming 24/7, but just having a look over each other's code, giving each other, little bits and tips and hints. And obviously, for a lot of the time it's juniors, it's quite good progressing with things like that. But it can work on any end of the spectrum. Code reviews as well. That's another thing that a lot of people are obviously looking over. And the amount of people that I hear moaning about code reviews, where the code review is being done by someone who hasn't actually been in the code base for over 15 years is quite surprising. My personal favorite is having someone come to me and say, I had my code reviewed. It was .NET. The guy's only ever written Java and he didn't actually work in a code base for 25 years. It was Java in like the 90s that he was doing. I was like, don't really want someone reviewing your code like that. But yeah, open communication, I think, is the biggest sort of end of the spectrum. But like I said, we're not here to try and kind of say that where you are on the spectrum, but all I'm saying, if you can identify where you are, if you are somewhere on there, then hopefully there'll be something for you to take away from here. So it sounds stupid, but change doesn't come unless you've got the ideas to implement. Leaving management to get involved with all the changes will just kind of mean that you never get what you want out of any project, because if you don't say it, you can't think it into happening. I'm not saying storm in tomorrow and completely demand a rewrite of everything that you're doing. That's not where I'm going with this at all. But if you don't at least try and contribute some ideas, everything else in this talk's kind of a little bit irrelevant, because it's kind of what I wrote it from. But exploring what's new, as daft as it sounds, I know that you guys are all here tonight probably for that purpose, but encouraging people who maybe don't have the opportunity to come to meetups and stuff to explore what's new, or exploring management to explore what's new, or even just kind of suggesting little things. So one thing that we have in place at the moment is that once a day we send around an article that's relevant to what we're doing. So I'll send an article to the rest of my team that's relevant to .NET, just so that if they're trying to look into .NET at some point, they've got an idea of what's going on and they can kind of keep up to date. But the main thing is that you need to get people talking. Again, I've deleted the stats from this, but I do have a full source list that I'll post. Over 70% of major changes in large software teams don't come from the first discussion. And if anyone does work in a larger software team, or a team that, maybe has a larger project behind it, it's not easy to just go in and say, I think we should do this. And someone goes, oh yeah, all right. There's a lot more process that it has to go through, or maybe there's a few different areas that you kind of have to go through. But the idea is that if you can be the one to follow up, then you can do good things. But the main thing, I think, is knowing your buying points. Just because you've got an idea, it doesn't mean you aren't selling to someone. And this is where I've kind of tried to bring theory that's external to software development into this to apply to tonight. The idea of bringing an idea to someone, convincing them someone, you are selling them something, you are selling them an idea, and you need to know where people would buy into that idea and why people would buy into that idea before you pitch it to them. If you walk into someone who's non-technical and try and pitch it, a very technical solution to them, they need to have the non-technical understanding for it to sort of process for them, and that's not their fault, it's just the situation that they're in. So where I've tried to go with this talk is helping people understand where the buying points come about and why people would buy into different things. So generating your own ideas for a start is super helpful. It sounds so daft looking at this so simply, but when you are thinking of your own ideas, there's so many simple places to look. Mark Twain came out with a quote years and years ago. I studied it in GCSE English and it's kind of stuck with me since. Take what's being done around you and find a way to do it better. If you look at something and just think, I could fix that or I could change that, don't hesitate to run with that. It is a new idea and you can run with that. Engaging the community. So when I first did this talk, I've left it in for a reason, but when I first did this talk, it was to a group of people who didn't necessarily get out and get involved with the community to kind of explore what was new. But one thing that you can say by being here is that you are already on the first step of wanting to change and wanting to grow, and that's great, and really appreciate everyone kind of getting involved with that. But there's a few other things. I can highly recommend getting involved with the community Slack. Manchester Tech Slack, MCR Tech, is a great way. I don't contribute as much as I should, but I do read a lot of great ideas being thrown about in there. James throws out great stuff all the time. There's a few other people in this room that I've seen throw out wonderful ideas in there, and it's a great place to ask a question and get a friendly response from people around the Manchester Tech community. I've never really seen any animosity in there, and there's always people willing to help. I'm not partnered with that Slack in any way, by the way. I just really think it's a good thing. The other thing, if you don't have a chance to get out and go to meetups on the regular or for whatever reason, listen to a podcast, read a blog, look at a forum. If it takes 10 minutes a day and you get to find out something new, you potentially spot an idea that could make the rest of your life easier at work. I'm not telling you to do anything in particular. This is just suggestions on where to start. But the main thing is finding the pain point. If you can find the thing that is causing things to be held up or things to be run poorly or things just being made difficult for you, if you address those first, you get the biggest things out of the way. Even if they seem like the littlest pain points, they open the door for so much more. But generally by offering something different, you can guarantee that even if you just raise a few eyebrows and like, are you sure? You've got people starting to buy in because they're engaging you. That's what a lot of people don't realize. If you suggest something that you think is going to be absolutely ridiculous, even if you get a reaction that's like, that's absolutely ridiculous, people have started a dialogue around the idea, and that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily always realize. So the 5 types of buyers theory is something that is used in sales-based jobs quite a lot, but is something that I think can really apply to driving change in the world of development. And basically the idea is that there's 5 types of buyers throughout a business, and you could be any one of these people at any one time, depending on which end of a conversation you are. But until you, kind of like I said before, appreciate where someone is in this buying process and get your head around how things would apply to them, you'll never really have the right approach to convince someone that change is good, no matter how much they could be on side. So the first half I've kind of called the tech staff, because I'm taking this in the context of a developer wants to change something. We'll leave it with that. So the users are the first group. So they're the people who would use this technology day in, day out. So let's say a developer, I'm just thinking of an example, wants to upgrade from .NET Framework to .NET Core. I know a lot of you are going to look at me and go, who still uses .NET Framework? Trust me, it's out there. It's a lot worse than you think. But yeah, these are the people that use it on a day-to-day basis. The people that are going to be affected by it in work have to deal with that technology. And they're the people that, if you suggest improving that technology to, will buy in on the basis of it's going to make their lives easier to use it. The influencers aren't necessarily users of that technology, but they're people who throughout the business can get things done. If you get an influencer on side, it can help sway any other part of the business. So that could be, you know, the head of dev, that could be the junior tester who's really good mates with the CFO. It could be anyone. But if you can find an influencer to get you on side, that's the way forward. The deciders are probably the most important one though, because the deciders are the ones who will sign something off. They will say, we're doing this. they are the people that at the end of the day you need to convince to get something changed. What I would say is influencers and deciders are often very much interlinked. You'll notice how all of these things can be fluid as we go a bit further through. But then we come to the blockers, and I guarantee that somewhere along the line, someone here has encountered a blocker to what's going forward in their job. I'm not going to ask anyone to raise hands, but I can see a few smiles around the room already. Who's struggled to get something signed off because it costs too much at work in terms of new tech or in terms of any form of change? It happens. I totally get it. If you're in finance or if you've got a budget or anything like that, you need convincing that there's going to be some form of return on investment, and it's not always black and white when looking at new technology. So you've got to make people understand from that perspective where the return on their investment would come, and that may not necessarily be financial. It may be in terms of productivity, it may be in terms of morale, things like that. But those people are the ones who control the money. The gatekeepers are a bit of an interesting one, because a gatekeeper could be literally anybody in a business. But if there's someone who controls the flow of information when making a decision, they need to be convinced that every piece of information is available. Traditionally, in a sales-based job, a gatekeeper is a receptionist who you call up and say, "Can I speak to such and such?" And they go, "No." But the reality is, a gatekeeper in this could be anyone who will control the idea getting further up the chain to a decider. So you need to make sure that you address things with those gatekeepers and have them on side. So kind of looking through, the same person could be multiple buying points at any one time, and depending on where someone is in a business, it can be, completely different. A user might be a decider the next day, and there might be a gatekeeper the day after that. It depends what the topic is, and the right person will change every single time. It also could be that one person is all four of those things, and you've got to address what you want to do with all of those different areas. But unless you cover all of those bases, you can't sign a change off. They've got to be convinced on all of those factors. But if you are someone's ally, it can help. Collaboration always leads to positive change. And I'm not saying go in and cuddle up to someone who can influence the whole scope of the business tomorrow, but if you've got the mentality of working together, you can always be kind of moving forward with each other. So hopefully kind of looking at that, you can see from an external perspective how different people in the team that you work in may affect things when you want to make a change moving forward. So where can it lead to? I've just included a couple of changes that I've witnessed over the last few months in the Manchester tech community itself. Just to inflate Dave's ego, I've left this one in. Because he went into a company and introduced a completely transparent progression matrix to ensure that developers knew where they were moving forward. And now he won't heckle me, so that's the main thing. The other thing, I've actually seen this happen in person. I unfortunately can't name the company at the moment because I don't want to give away too much, but there's a company processing 1.2 million card payments per day because someone turned up to a meeting at a Northern Quarter pub. I happened to be at that meeting. I have no influence on them implementing Azure CI/CD, but I was there when they walked in and went, "This could be awesome for what we do." And they were able to go and address the change. And it took a bit of a fight. I think it took 12 weeks before they got sign off for a trial, but now there's 1.2 million payments per day being processed through that company. I've also seen a developer walk into a company and basically turned around and emphasized the benefits of .NET Core, kind of the example I was using earlier. And by pitching it at different levels and with different techniques to different people, they have now completely revamped their tech stack. And it's great because the poor guy had VB.NET on his plate about a year ago, and now they've managed to move towards .NET Core with all greenfield projects. So this is something that you may look at and go, "Oh God, I don't want to cross-train," when you see this slide. I'm not about to force you onto that. The idea of a team being fluid is something that is controversial in some environments. It's not as controversial in others. The statement why cross-training is as valuable as upskilling could be a bit of an interesting one. But if you kind of look at it, there are some perks to cross-training. You learn something new for a start. and you can help out where you need to. You can find gaps, because if you realize by going in and understanding someone else's process that something is missing, you can maybe drive a change in your own process to make life easier for them and therefore easier for yourself. Obviously, you're adding value and there's a greater sense of collaboration in the team. And in some dev teams, I have seen people do actually rotate jobs. Again, this is very fluid, but you are removing that rigid structure and helping craft the team and mold it as you move forward. That being said, I'm not saying go into your team and cross-train. You don't have to walk in tomorrow and say, I want to do testing, I want to do dev, I want to be a PMO or anything like that. I'm not saying go and do that. But if you sit down and try and empathize with someone else's job, how things work for them, and just get an understanding of how things go, you can completely change your perspective on driving change. Because when people have got an understanding of how other bodies within the team work, and how someone carries their role out, or how someone is affected in their role, it can assist you moving forward with collaboration. And as a team, you may decide to do something that individually you would never have noticed before. If I could offer you one piece of advice that as a non-developer, I'm totally unqualified to do. If you sat down and talked to someone for 10 minutes about their role and just said, tell me something I don't know about your role, it can offer you so much more. I've tried it in my team. This isn't exclusive to development, and it's changed a lot of my perspective. I personally do it for 10 minutes a week with other people in my team. Just ask them what's going on, ask them to learn a bit more. And it's incredible how much we've managed to change over the last 18 months moving forward. Obviously, it's all well and good putting this model to you and suggesting that it's super easy to walk in and change a team if you follow this structure and stuff like that. It's not, I get it. There's going to be resistance, but it's a case of understanding why moving forward. So there's some key things as to why things just don't get done within companies. The first one's blind ignorance. As a general rule of thumb, if you don't mind me asking, if you work in a non-technical company but in a software role, do you mind sort of raising your hand just so I can get a gauge? As in, software is not your main product. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, that's a really small amount of people in the room in comparison. About 80% of devs work for companies where software is not the thing that they sell. Obviously not at this meetup tonight, but usually the key driver is people just don't understand technically why stuff would benefit them moving forward. Non-technical people will just not understand why the change needs to be made. And it's not that they don't want to change, they just don't get it. The cost we covered before, again, usually ties in quite well with blind ignorance. What's this thing doing for us if it costs us so much? If it's saving load times and stuff like that, or anything ridiculously technical, people may not necessarily get it. But again, the cost comes with another part. So obviously, a lot of things are far cheaper to implement than people imagine. So if you're talking about bringing about technical change, the one thing I've noticed with non-technical managers who have technical staff underneath them is that they automatically assume that every change would cost the company a small fortune because it's tech and because it's the in thing at the moment. And obviously, looking around the room, everyone will kind of get not everything costs money, and that's great. And we've got the wonderful world of open source where there's so much free to access. So making a change doesn't necessarily cost anything. And I think people need to be kind of freed up to the idea that technology and money don't necessarily marry into each other in a way that maybe 10 years ago they did. And it's about changing those perceptions so that people can understand that, you know, there is a benefit to this moving forward. One thing that I've kind of seen over the last few months is that the notion that a business has an IT function is now becoming a business integrates its IT function. IT is part of the drive of the business. That obviously applies really well to dev moving forward, but there are a lot of people who don't get that, and it's creating the perception in their head as to why these things would matter. We're already so far behind, we'll never catch up. So technical debt. Businesses that are used to operating with massive inefficiencies would not understand the efficiency of improving their technology teams because they're just not used to being efficient. So creating the perception moving forward that technology and technical debt can be combated in a way that would be beneficial to the business and can be done in a way that's theoretically possible, every technical debt is tackleable at the end of the day, let's face it. That's something that will see a resistance to change, and it's again about changing people's perceptions. Again, not being sure what the right solution is another big thing. If a business is scared of adopting a change or implementing something new due to the fear of the unknown, I totally get it. I've seen companies try and adopt change and it's gone wrong. I've seen companies try and adopt new technologies and they've gone wrong. But at the end of the day, it's all about planning and road mapping and getting the right solution. If you can contribute to that idea, then obviously that'll help move forward. But the biggest thing is, no one suggests the change moving forward. If I can create a spark in someone's head to go in and suggest one small thing tomorrow at work, I'm happy with how this talk's gone, because the biggest thing is that everyone wants the change, but they don't necessarily mention that they want the change. And that's obviously not ideal. So you've managed to convince someone to make a change. What now? There are some common challenges that companies do have to face when they're open to change, and it's all about addressing those. So if you're not implementing the right systems or procedures, it's all well and good adopting the latest new tech or adopting agile or adopting something. I mean, whatever it is that you choose to adopt, if you don't integrate it properly, it's never going to go right. If you've suggested the change and you really want to shape your team, it's your responsibility. I'm not saying it's your responsibility to roll something out or get involved in the sense of you should take management lead on it. But if you can see that the change that you pushed for is not going to integrate right, say something. Again, it's literally a case of, if you can see it, say it. Due diligence. Again, this is something that I have encountered in pretty much every single job I've ever done. If someone tells you something's going to be done, don't rely on that. And I'm not slagging off anyone I work with here. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I'm saying is, if something's going to be done and you want it to be done a certain way, just make sure it is done. Hey, has this been done yet? That's all it is. But not utilizing something is arguably worse than not having it. I've had a lot of arguments with people about cloud moving back and forward, and whilst I'm not a developer, I've heard of a lot of companies that have poured millions of pounds into these cloud-based solutions and they don't need them. They're not being utilized properly. Arguably, that's worse than just not having a cloud-based solution, right? And if you know what you want to do and you know how to bring the change about, make sure you know what the potential of that change is moving forward, because then you can make sure that it's being utilized to its full potential. So when shouldn't we be pushing to adopt change? What symptoms exist for that? Someone may disagree with some of my points here, and that's fine. I'm happy to spark a discussion. If there's no point in making a change, do you really need to adopt something because it's new? If something's new and released and can offer added value to you by implementing it, I'm all for driving the change. But if something's not going to add value to you, but it's just a newer version, do you need to adopt that newer version? That I'll leave up to people. If you want to prepare for the future, I'll happily have that debate with anyone after the talk. And I'm not trying to blanket that. That would be contextual. The other thing is, if the training to utilize something is inadequate, it will never be utilized properly. So if no one's ever worked with anything or you've driven a change, make sure there's something in place so that people can adopt that change moving forward. You might be really into Kubernetes at home and you might have studied it and you know that it's going to be worth millions for the business and it's going to be this, that, whatever, it's great. But no one else in the team's ever looked into it. But the main thing here for me is when not everyone's bought into a change. Because if not everyone's bought into a change, it's never going to be implemented to its full potential. So that's why I'm such a big advocate for convincing people to change moving forward. Also, I would say that monitoring the data and the benefits of a change where possible is always ideal. If you never monitor something, you'll never understand whether it's being utilized to its full effect. This is where data and MI teams, if anyone's fortunate enough to have one, can be super valuable, because you can see changes in productivity, you can see changes in workload, things like that. Obviously, it's harder for smaller companies to monitor this, but if sometimes you can see change is better, change is worse, and you can understand that. But it's important to not just accept a change for what it is and leave it be. Is it working? Is this the right move for us? It's all about being fluid moving forward. But yeah, other people will always have different thought processes to you. But like I said, the different members of the 5 types of buyers that we looked at before will need to consider sort of the following moving forward. Cost versus benefit is probably the biggest one on the blocker side of things. Is the benefit crystal clear so that the organization can let that drive their prioritization process? Is this something that you are pushing out in a way that there is a benefit to the company that outweighs the cost that they're going to have? That cost might not be financial, that cost might be something that comes in the sense of time given up or things like that. Anticipating the needs of the end user is also a very big thing. That end user might be one of your devs, that end user might be one of your customers. It changes depending on the scenario, but how are they going to benefit from that change moving forward? And that's what someone who would authorize the change would always have to consider. Again, are the use cases valid? Obviously, with the fast-moving nature of the tech industry, you can't really second guess viability of a technology moving forward. I don't want to slate JavaScript because I feel like James might look at me, but there's obviously, yeah, I see the hissing there. You know, there's a lot of companies that I've seen trying to utilize JavaScript in scenarios where it may not be necessary. There's also a lot of companies that could really use JavaScript and TypeScript in ways that they're just ignoring it because they don't want to consider the use case. But yeah, the change in convention would also be quite a big thing. If a change is going to cause a company to evolve, even in the slightest bit moving forward, it's a catalyst for bigger change further down the line and bigger progression. So a small change might seem like a small change now, but moving forward, it can help things sort of moving forward in the sense that it will allow the company to grow and will allow the business to grow. Are there regulations? As much as everyone loves the idea of driving change, there are regulations that people will have to consider when implementing something, particularly anyone who works in fintech at the moment. That being said, I experience regulation on a daily basis myself. I've had to change a lot about the way that I work over the sort of the past 18 months. And I think everyone's noticed it because you get cookie pop-ups about GDPR and stuff like that now. There's a lot that people have to consider, and they need to make sure things are implemented moving forward. But if you can consider that before you begin trying to bring about the change, then you can answer all of these questions moving forward. So the two kind of main things that I think that higher up people will look at is, firstly, will we need to repurpose or release our talent to do this? If you're a team of 8 devs and you've got super tight deadlines, people aren't going to be that keen to give everything up if things are quite tight, deadlines are short. And it's a case of benefit versus cost, as we discussed before. If you can prove that the benefit of giving up this time outweighs the cost of losing some devs towards a deadline, or will make them more efficient towards that deadline and things like that, then that will be obviously solving that problem. The other thing is, how secure is the new technology? I think Mike probably highlighted that in his talk earlier with AWS. Seems amazing. Still got its vulnerabilities moving forward if you don't utilize it properly. But yeah, for example, people who use Blazor, to me at the moment, it's not at the level it needs to be, in my opinion. I'm not slating anyone who uses Blazor. I just think that it's an early adopted technology. And if you are adopting a technology early on, you need to be sure that there's no vulnerabilities moving forward with it. And that's a fear that a lot of people have because they don't want their business to be down. So to kind of summarize everything that we've been through today, change is great, but look after yourself first. Don't burn out. If things aren't changing, address yourself before you address anyone else. I don't mean to profess mental health to anyone, but obviously burnout's demonstrable, and I don't want to wish that upon anyone. Everyone has the opportunity to get involved with this. It's just about how you pitch stuff. You can pitch stuff from the lowest level right the way up to the highest level. As long as you pitch it with every aspect in mind of where it would go, there's no reason why you can't bring about change, no matter what the size of business that you're in. Finding the pain points and working to solve them is always a great place to start. If you can find something that's making people's lives difficult and create a solution for it, they're always going to be open to listening to change. But starting small is never going to be an issue. Progress is progress, even if it's just the smallest bit of progress. But, you know, change can happen no matter how stuck in their ways anyone is. But it's all about appealing to people in a way that makes them understand, it makes them empathize with what you're trying to achieve. And if you can get that moving forward, then that's always going to be, you know, always going to be appealing to them moving forward. So accommodating to people's thought processes when you're pitching this change will kind of see everything as you go forward. So if you prepare for all angles when you go to propose your change, or you prepare for any resistance that you may face, you can make sure that the changes fit and that you've got the right position in your conversation moving forward. But everyone can change. They're just at different points on the scale we covered at the start of this talk. And it's up to you to decide where you are and how you want to move forward with it. Not everyone wants to be the most progressive dev team in the world. I get that. You know, that might not be you. But thank you. I really appreciate that you taking the time, and no one threw pizza at me, so it's progress.